Hello, family. Welcome to JFK Today, your direct link to all things politics, comedy, and culture. I'm your host, Janaya Future Khan, champ yapper and frequent nuisance in the activist and comedy worlds. We're doing some quick hits, recalls, and Robin DiAngelo. That's going to make sense in a second. So, first of all, the Paris Paralympics start today. So, wait, today is tomorrow. It starts Wednesday. You'll be getting this news Thursday, but tune in. Do not deny yourself the other classmen who are the best athletes in the world, right? Like, if you love competition, they're bringing the heat. So that's one. Two, the other day I mentioned that Russian billionaire and Telegram founder Durov was, arrested in France because of criminal activity or alleged criminal activity on the app Telegram. Well, he's been indicted. Right? And he's now unable to leave the country. He's been charged with complicity in distributing child sexual abuse images and aiding organized crime. One is disgusting, and the other one could be cool depending on who's doing it. And this is the thing. Tech billionaires, right, and tech CEOs are shaking in their little boots a bit at the idea that they could be personally liable for what happens on their platforms. I'm very keen on what happens here, and I think we need to be paying very special attention because there's a reason why Mark Zuckerberg decided to kind of weigh in and send out that letter yesterday so close to this upcoming election. So I'm not going to be mad if they're suddenly personally liable for that. Like, I don't like these hoes. Okay. So I also wanted to re-up. If you recall a while ago, there was an episode where I mentioned that in Georgia, the elections board committee was trying to do some fuck shit where that's an official news term, fuck shit, where they're going to essentially attempt to steal the election. So go way, way back, right, all the way back to 2020 when Trump called up Georgia and was like, yo, can you find me 11,000 votes? And I don't know, that's low-key election fraud. Well, the three people who tried to help him do that are still on that board, and they tried to see through a little law, right? Two enactments that essentially allows them to just block and delay without any restriction when it comes to the election counts. So it would allow them essentially to sabotage the state's vote entirely, right? And Donald Trump came out and he said, wow, these people are amazing. He called them pit bulls fighting for honesty, transparency, and victory. What a loser. What a bunch of losers. What a loser. So here's the thing that you need to know. While these rules would alter the role of local election officials, they're known as superintendents, what it really allows them to do is decide who gets to win an election. And they want to set that precedent in every state moving forward. The good news is, in what is otherwise ugly news, is, well, the Democratic Party was like, no, we're going to sue you. And it's a very strong lawsuit. So the likelihood of this actually working without any kind of friction is out. They will tie them up in legalese for 100,000 years, and I support it. Sometimes it turns out the state's really facing itself and not really fighting for. You get what I'm saying. Anyway, lastly, I mentioned that Joe Biden should do some awesome shit before he goes out. He's tried, actually, not the big ticket things that we know about, but student debt, right? So you might recall that the Supreme Court shot down $400 billion worth of student debt forgiveness, right? I said billion, not million, but billion. They shot that down, so they revamped it, and it just went through again, way up to the Supreme Court, and they rejected it. The Supreme Court rejected Biden's revamped student debt relief package, and this new plan was part of an approach to student debt after that initial rejection. And the way that they kind of revamped it was you will pay less on the student loans every month, and the path to getting student loan forgiveness was essentially just smoothed over so you could get it faster. It was a very laborious process, and unshockingly, the Supreme Court shot it down. And yes, it was based on ideological lines. What I mean is it was 6-3 because they have 6 far-right friggin' losers on one side and then three people who are technically on our side. And yeah, I just, it really pisses me off because in this red versus blue, it's always people who lose. It's always the people who need the support and the people who deserve the support that lose the most, and stand to lose the most. I never wanted to know this much about the Supreme Court in my whole life, but it turns out that this is a vehicle that absolutely is like just truly sucks and is working against us on every level imaginable. So would love to see some shifts there, but in the meantime, you can expect that the Biden administration will once again try to revamp it and send it back up there. And I mean, nigga, sign an executive order, like EO that shit. Be gangster. This is your time, my guy. All right. First subject matter, recalls. What is going on in America? I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been like a real serious uptick. So I started to do some research because that's me. So, okay, lead-tainted applesauce. 500 kids get sick. By the way, this is like this year, right? Salmonella contaminated cantaloupe led to 400 illnesses and 6 deaths this year. Okay. Most recently, Boarhead, I think they do like meats and stuff, right? They had a recall because there was a listeria outbreak. 8 people have died because of that this year. Why is this happening? And I just want to say, first of all, I'm very sorry to those families because there's hardly a less dignified death than death by cantaloupe. It is the weakest. It is the most horrible of melons. It's barely a fruit. I hate it so much, and they were doing God's work by eating those things for us because nobody wants them. I didn't know people ate cantaloupe. I thought that they were just something you put in fruit packages so they could scam us. It is completely not okay. Death by cantaloupe. If that happened to me, lie. Right? It's wrong that it's happening across the board, but just lie. Lie if you care about me. Lie if you care about me. But the point is, why is this happening? The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, that's our little FDA, reported a 27.6% increase in recalls with 134 events in Q1 of 2024. So it turns out that it wasn't just in my head. I have been noticing it, and it is on the rise. So the rise is among the highest recorded in the past 5 years, with undeclared allergens being the leading cause of food recalls, accounting for 51 incidents. So they added sesame to a list of, allergens, whatever. So, I had to go find me an expert. So Teresa Murray, she's from the consumer watchdog at U.S. Public Interest Research Group. They have perg.org, that's where I got this source from, said that food producers and packagers just need to focus more on cleanliness and disclose allergens that could make people sick or kill them. And I'm just like, are we not going to connect this to the overexploited, overcapacitated working class people who have to, they're these, from shrinkflation and everything else, we have people who are getting fired and laid off. You have fewer people with bigger responsibilities. There's going to be things that are overlooked. Facilities are not going to be as clean. People can't keep up with the workload. And I'm not going to be one of these hoes that are blaming the labor force for this. This is clearly because of exploitation of the labor force. And it's the other side of the labor force that's suffering because of it. These are regular, everyday people that are eating foods. These are children that are getting sick. And I'm like, what is the solve on this? So I started to figure out more of what she was talking about because, again, what an undignified way to go. I don't want to eat a bologna sandwich and then die. I can't. I'll just never eat bologna again. I'll never eat fruit. I won't eat. Okay, I like applesauce. In addition, there's 3 things I eat at night. It's Siggy's yogurt, some applesauce, or some popcorn. And Skinny Pop, it's advertised as the girls' popcorn, but my God, that shit is delicious. What happens when the recalls come for me? What happens? Where's our revolution? Where's our revolution for food justice? So anyway, Food for Thought 2024, that's a report that came out on this, examined 3 big problems with food safety. One is that it takes weeks, months, or years to track the source of food poisoning. And I'm like, what? That long? You don't know where it's happening? So after a food problem is identified, recalls take way too long because regulators can't mandate them. Well, there's an issue right there that feels like there's a solve because this is just going to get worse. I just read about venomous worms getting washed up on shore somewhere and mosquitoes, with some equestrian friggin', is that the word, equine or whatever, horse, the triple E. And it made me think of all the ways that I know a millennial's age by how many E's they add to their bye. But anyway, it's not the sweet bye, it's an EEE, and it's a disease. And I'm just like, I can't keep up with the diseases and the recalls and the whatever. Before we have a revolution, we're just going to have a ham sandwich and die. Like, I won't let that happen to us. We've got to figure this out. So right there, after a food problem is identified, recalls, they take too long to issue because regulators can't mandate them. Well, maybe they should. What's the FDA doing about this? And when recalls are announced, consumers often don't find out about them in a timely fashion, if ever, which means by the time the only way to figure out that something is contaminated is if somebody gets very, very sick or dies. It seems to me that there could be several places in between, the production of something and then somebody eating it and dying. Seems to me like we could put a couple of gates to slow this down just a little bit. That just seems like the normal thing. So Theresa Murray had this to say: everyone needs to do better. Food producers, regulators, and lawmakers. We shouldn't have to worry that everything from soup to nuts could land us in the hospital. I'm sorry, I got lost in her soup to nuts. I would never have made that comparison. Soup to nuts? That's like, that might have to be a new saying for me. It makes absolutely zero sense. I kind of like it. Anyway, on to the next, right? Now that we've mentioned these recalls, and I'm not bananas, I don't need to pull out the tinfoil hat for this matter. We might, for this one though, Robin DiAngelo. So, okay, listen. So this is the author of White Fragility, okay? And a couple other books, and like in 2020 had this massive, explosive influence, particularly in white spaces, because they were like, oh my God, somebody's talking about this that doesn't scare me. And I've never publicly, said anything against Robin DiAngelo. I feel like anytime somebody is trying to do this kind of humanitarian or good work or educate people on things, I'm like, I'm not going to, unless you're doing harm, I'm not really going to. But I have never liked Robin DiAngelo's work. I mean, not ever, okay? If this was a book that you read, and I'm going to mention why this person's coming up, because this is about to be a big kerfuffle I'm about to bring up. But basically, the reason why I'm bringing up Robin DiAngelo is because you may have seen that the New York Post put out a whole expose on Robin DiAngelo, right? The educator turned multi-millionaire because white people were like, take every dollar I have to tell me that I'm horrible, and also that maybe I'm slightly redeemable, but I'll never have to talk to a black person just to find out. So that's what we did as a culture. And she is currently on a whole spread in the New York Post because apparently Robin DiAngelo plagiarized several parts of her work from authors of color, what she calls BIPOC authors, right? And as you go on her website, it's very clear. She's like, cite authors. It's the most important thing, especially BIPOC authors, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then she didn't. So you might wonder, am I bringing this up because I care? I couldn't give a goddamn. I mean, yeah, it's a problem. We're going to get there. But that's the impact that this person had was so outsized that the only way that I could think of it is like the collective hysteria that followed Robin DiAngelo, especially as it came to white people, was very much like the same way that the flu pathogen works. Do you know what I mean? Okay, so the flu pathogen alters our brain in that first 48 hours. So before we know that we're sick, it actually alters our brain so that we're more sociable. And that way we can infect people more. That's how the pathogen works. That's the only way I know to describe Robin DiAngelo's work. Because I can't point to a single thing that thing changed or did in any measurable way. But if it made you feel better, it's okay. Hopefully you understand that work works like that is a perch, not a nest. It's not somewhere for you to sit. But I think I can sum up my issue with Robin DiAngelo's work in one sentence, which is imagine that you could just solve the problem of racial injustice in America by just having white people talk about it together. Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be so amazing? You'd never have to talk to a black person in your life. You'd never have to be friends with them. You never have to confront them or be weird around them. No. It was buco bucks. It was a lot of white folks. And again, if this work was something to you, don't let my disdain for this individual shift the work if it had some kind of impact on you, because again, there's a reason why I didn't come out swinging with this person. I think ultimately I can have my opinions about this, but it doesn't do harm. And so it's okay. But why am I bringing up Robin DiAngelo's work, even though I literally can't stand the hamster? Okay. This whole plagiarism thing. This is not the first time that it's happened. If you start thinking about it, just get your mind flowing. You might recall another situation earlier this year where Claudine Gay, right? The first black the first black president of Harvard, that is the esteemed Harvard, right? And it's 387 year at the time, period, had never had a black president before. She was the first, Claudine Gay. And if you followed that story earlier this year, you know that Claudine Gay was accused of plagiarism, right? And it created this huge force, right? I mean, it was outsized, the amount of disgust and rage and anger that was directed at Claudine Gay. She couldn't get away from it. And she tried to fight. There were so many scholars, black scholars, allies, artists, journalists, reporters. Everybody said, hey, this is clearly a racial, there was a racial mob against her. This is clearly a scam, a very serious concerted effort by the conservatives and their think tanks to oust this black woman from her job. Well, she was forced to resign. And I'll get back to that in a second, because whether we know it or not, actually, no, I was going to say whether you know it or not, and then I was going to tell you something, but I'm actually already telling you it, so I just need to say what I'm saying. I got weird about that. There's one person behind it, right? There's one person behind this particular strategy. His name is Christopher Rufo, not to be confused with Rufio from that amazing Peter Pan movie. No, this called Hook. This guy is just a hoe. He's a hoe for far right-wing extremism. So let me tell you a little bit about Christopher Rufo, right? He is a extremely far-right shitbag, right? Who is directly behind the term DEI. Remember when everybody started to blame DEI for everything? That was Christopher Rufo. You're a DEI hire. Right? That's what he called Claudine Gay. If we go further back, you might recall that in academia and really across the board, there was an entire campaign that was about critical race theory. Remember that? And there was all this concern about critical race theory in the schools, critical race theory in our elementary schools, critical race theory in the curriculum. There was all this hullabaloo, all this fuss, all this hysteria, and you saw the Conservative Party and the far right-wing extremists and the MAGA bigots and everybody else run rampant. I mean, Moms for Liberty, basically Nazis, who are women. They very, very intentionally started to get on, school boards in different districts, started to get on city council seats so they could influence the curriculum specifically. A big reason for that was to get books like To Kill a Mockingbird, or, The Hate You Give, or whatever other stuff was here. I'm not American, I don't know, but I know the list of banned books. This is what started it. And it is amazing to me. I mean, yes, every right-wing pundit loser comes out and says, I'm the one who did this, I'm the one who made this up, I'm responsible for this, but there is somebody who is, and his name is Christopher Rufo. Before he was on this whole critical race theory and this whole DEI thing, you might also remember when it was like Disney gone woke, right? And there was all this focus on Disney and the hysteria about the Little Mermaid being black. What a bunch of losers. Christopher Rufo. So there's one guy who's very much behind this. And here's the thing. I did my research with Claudine Gay, right? I did. There were some oversights. The same thing is very likely true of Robin DiAngelo, right? The issue here is what is the intent, and is the response more outsized than it ought to be? Is the punishment more outsized than it ought to be? Because here's the thing that Christopher Rufo knows very, very well, right? He's got one goal, and he's very clear about this. He's very open about this. The one goal that he's got is to destroy the ideological left. He is attacking ideas, and what he's doing is putting every paper he can find that anybody's ever written and putting it through AI, plagiarism reading software, and running with it and singling out people and pushing campaigns against them. So Claudine Gay, Dr. Claudine Gay, was called a DEI hire. But that simply wasn't the case. It was absolute bullshit. She had published 11 peer-reviewed papers in the leading journals in political science. That was her discipline. And as far as Harvard presidents go, Dr. Gay's total number of publications was just one less than the 12 publications that Nathan March-Pusey, who was president, and Derek Bok, who was another president, and Neil Rubenstein, who was another president, right, had combined at their time of appointments to the Harvard presidency. Do you understand? She was more than qualified for the job. Now, I listened to black scholars and I listened to, researchers and writers and all those other things. And yeah, there were a couple of oversights. Harvard did its own investigation and they called it missteps. That's literally it. We are talking about the world of ideas where we've got 8 billion people on the planet. There's going to be some goddamn overlap here. And I'm not saying that work doesn't need to be cited. Of course it does. But have you guys picked up an MLA book recently? It's a lot. It is a lot. I love name dropping, but you got to do a lot. And sometimes the way that things work is we do have these small oversights. If it was egregious, it already would have been found. But what Christopher Rufo did well was tap into a moment of resentment. Very, very well. I want it to be really, I want to ground down here for a moment because what I'm about to say requires real intentionality. And I want to focus the story on Claudine Gay because Robin DiAngelo is significantly less significant. Not because, really because of impact. And once you understand why this is happening, it's much easier to understand where we're headed. So with Claudine Gay, days after her resignation, which she did give, right? Her, along with Harvard University, the students, faculty, alumni, observers, they all sounded the alarm that her resignation was the outcome of mounting political pressure from conservatives on colleges and universities. This is very much the truth. Here's the thing that makes it more complicated, right? Part of the reason why they were so successful was because Claudine Gay, Dr. Claudine Gay, Dr. Gay, Dr. Gay, sorry, was in a bind, right? She had board trustees, investors, stakeholders, key stakeholders, and we know those are the people who have the big bucks, and they're the ones who Harvard really listens to, trying to push the institution to the right. The hard right. Then you've got the need to put the institution as forward-facing left, as progressive, as a place that's rife with ideas. And then you have the student population that's like, hey, you're actually not even close to left. You need to be here. And at that particular moment, Claudine Gay was being attacked by a sizable population of students, according to the Harvard Crimson, which I like to read to keep in the know, because she wasn't coming out and distancing Harvard from Israel. All of this matters, right? There is a way, if we look at the broader context, right, around Claudine Gay's resignation, right? She confronted this crisis just after the Supreme Court ruled on affirmative action, right? So that was when the Supreme Court was like, this doesn't need to be enforced anymore. This is out, right? So the future of Harvard's admission policies are going to be impacted by this, right? And it was the university's response, not Dr. Claudine Gay specifically, but the university's response to the Israel-Hamas war, that's what they called it, and we know that's not the case, right? And the emergence of allegations of plagiarism that would prove fatal to her presidency. It had been around the time when she was called to resign. It was her 100th day as president, so she literally just got there, and she tried to move past it, right? But the criticism ultimately proved impossible to brush off. Why does this matter so much? In that moment, whether we intended to or not, the left and the right worked in tandem to unseat the first black president of Harvard. We can get into the nitty-gritty, but this is something that I'm paying such attention to. And I do not believe for a second that being black or being a woman or being a black woman or being marginalized in any way exempts you from criticism. Not in the slightest. But I'm concerned in the ways that Black identity is being weaponized against Black people by non-Black people, however polarizing those goals and however dissident those goals may be, right? And I think we have to ask ourselves, did it have to go down that way? Was that the best strategy? Do we need better strategies moving forward? How are we opening up ourselves to attack? And again, this isn't about looking at it and saying, well, you know, if she had just done this and that, I mean, we got to be a bit smarter. We know that you might be the face of an entity, but it's really the back end that decides what happens and where an institution goes. But we've got to look at this very closely because we can anticipate that these questions and this conundrum is going to keep coming up. It will only intensify over the course of this election campaign and worsen exponentially under a Black woman president should we get one, right? And yes, you know, I'll come out swinging against the status quo and I'll punch power in the face, but we're not talking, I mean, it's so easy to say we're talking about the president of the United States or the president of an Ivy League institution, but I'm not interested in how this is impacting them necessarily. It's about the ways in which, right, everyday Black women and girls, everyday trans women, everyday Black trans girls and non-binary people, everyday Black people as a whole are either being used as the battering ram or the battering rod that is caught between two opposing sides that are ironically, in that moment, seeing through the same goal and the same agenda. I don't think that Christopher Rufo would have been successful if Claudine Gay hadn't been caught in that vice grip. And there is a way in which we're seeing, and I mentioned that this would come up before, there is a way in which Black identity is being weaponized either, you know, against Israel or for it, because what we're seeing a lot, and again, we have to be very careful about clickbait, rage bait, race bait, bots, all that shit, because I know some of that is coming from Iran and Russia for sure, right? But we're seeing over and over again a bunch of Palestinians or Arab posers, right? I don't believe these are always, you always got to be mindful of a campaign like this, but they keep saying, Black people are this, Black people do that, Black people are this, Black people are that. And, you know, it sounds really familiar because every time there is a non-Black movement, right, whether it was something like the Women's March or, you know, Families Belong Together and migrant justice, pretty much every, you know, even to be perfectly honest with you, when Jewish folks and Zionists and, you know, Israelis or whatever the mishmash of folks, they kept saying over and over again, well, where are Black people? Even though we saw this rampant McCarthyism, it was like, where are Black people? And now we're seeing in a lot of these, you know, Arab organizing, where are the Black people? And I'm like, why are y'all always asking where are the Black people? I have never once gone to any migrant justice protests, no Arab justice protests or nothing like that, where I walked around and I said, where are the Irish? Where are the Irish? Where are the Italians and the Gabagool? Where are you? This is part of what people call that phenomenon of anti-Black racism. And the ways in which we leverage identity, and oftentimes, more often than not, Black identity towards our own specific goals and ends. And the people who lose out most are those who are most marginalized. So, of course, the community is most impacted by these things, but also Black people. And when we think about who's most impacted by these draconian laws, by the loss of a Black woman president, for example, of an Ivy League institution, it's Black people who suffer the most. Christopher Rufo is very smart at picking people that he knows are most vulnerable. That means who? Women and women of color. Specifically, don't be surprised when you see, you know, Ibrahim Kendi, who's another person I was like, ugh, like, what was all the fuss about? I mean, Stamped had a couple of good looks. I'm not going to lie. I read that and I was like, this is okay. I'm okay with this. But anti-racism, whatever that book was, something for anti-racist, garbage. Okay? I'm so happy if it did something for you. But like, truly a pile of trash. We have some very serious questions in front of us. And I say this, right? I say this. I'm like, y'all know I don't believe in identitarianism. I say this. I'm holding this while grieving the death of 19-year-old Mohammed Medo Halimi, he's a TikToker who is most known for saying, you know, having the life in Gaza videos and everything else. And he documented his life for us. And a few hours after the last Israeli airstrike in Gaza, right? This is an open air prison, right? It's no water, barely any electricity, hardly any food, where people are starving to death. It's 25 miles long and at most 6 miles wide, and all they do is just bomb it and bomb it and bomb it and bomb it. And after that last airstrike that you could read about in the news, he succumbed to his wounds several hours afterwards. Black and Palestinian solidarity is historic. Black solidarity with pretty much every marginalized community is historic. If you look back from Jews to Asian folks, Japanese, the LGBT community, the disabled community, I mean, my God, the Black Panther Party had a whole infrastructure in that. Go ahead, watch that documentary out there. It's fantastic. We've got to be careful that across the board, we aren't perpetuating the very same ideologies against each other that we ought to be fighting. And this is true for every single one of us. So this is only going to intensify. I'm so glad that I could just talk to you about this, because otherwise my poor friends would just have to hear me just like yapping about it until 4 a.m, shoving skinny pop in my face. But we've got a serious issue ahead of us. Christopher Rufo is going to keep going after these very specific academics. And while I don't give a damn about Robin DiAngelo's work, I know why she's being targeted, and I'm not okay with it. Because she's not hurting nobody. She's just not that smart. So, maybe I'm wrong. Where's the movement of all the white people who were transformed and made her a millionaire? Where's the movement of white people who are like, I have 8 black friends now? For those of you who don't have black friends but are really in the fight with me, go ahead and claim me. It's totally fine. I'll give you permission. If you do some cool shit, if you're just about the talk, leave me out of it. Anyway, that's the hits for today. I really appreciate you coming on this wild ride with me. Why don't we hit the VMs for that question of the day?
Hey, this is Latice. I'm calling from LA, and I wanted to know what are some of the biggest obstacles that you have overcome, and how did you go about doing it?
What a great question. When I was 19 years old, I read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. Truly a harrowing experience. I didn't fully understand what I was reading, but it tapped something inside of me, because I was, arrogant when you're trying to hide your insecurities. So I read that, and then I got to the Robin Hood part where she was like writing about how awful he was, and I was like, wait a second, what the fuck have I been reading? And then I just realized it was this weird libertarian wet dream, and Ayn Rand is just like a bag of, just like hot listeria infused applesauce. Like, the best use for Atlas Shrugged is to plug up all the busted pipes in the ocean. That's the best use. Anyway, I'll say that's one of the hardest things I went through. No, it was definitely a moment. I can actually just tap recently with my mom. And, she is back in the hospital. I learned that yesterday or whatever, and it made me weird. But the love of friends and the care of friends and doing good work and trusting, that things are happening as they need to. I have nothing profound to say about that. I guess I'm going through it. One of the hardest things is I'm going through it, and it means something to me to be going through it with all of you. And my mom is in great spirits, and she made fun of all of us on the phone. So there you go. It is a precaution, but when your heart operates at 24%, you're going to be in the hospital pretty regularly, and they love her there. She's a little wildcat, that one. My little wildcat mom. It's what happens when you give a black lady a Jewish name. Esther. She's not going nowhere. Anyway, what a great question. I'm so grateful to be here with you. Thank you for going through this with me. And now you have my problems and I have your problems. So with that, just want to say thank you so much for listening to JFK Today. It means the world to me. The show really is a labor of love. New episodes drop 4 times a week. We're available everywhere podcasts are streaming. Don't forget, I want to hear from you. Drop us a voice note of your questions at jfktodayShow@gmail.com. Shout out to KR and the JFK team. And shout out to you, the listeners, who make this all possible. I got you. Peace.